very excited to introduce the amazing Heath Smith, the co-founder of the Rogue Detection Teams, an organization that organizes and elevates the work of dog detection teams in science and conservation. Heath, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to turn things over to you.
All right, thanks for the introduction. Let me see if I can share my, sorry, it says it's disabled to share the screen.
I had to hit a button. You should be able to do it now.
Let me try again. All right. And how's that?
Yep, there it is.
Great. Okay, let me just slide everybody out of the way here. Well, hello, everybody. My name's Heath Smith, and I'll be presenting tonight for Rogue Detection Teams on Canines for Conservation, or another title would be An Introduction to Having a Dog as a Co-Woofer. And real quick, I just wanted to say happy birthday to my dad. I hope he was able to stay up and watch. And let's see, we should jump ahead, but we're not. There we go. I just want to say real quick, thank you to Oregon Wild. One, for having me on here this evening, and for their commitment to protect and restore Oregon's wildlands. It's a fantastic organization, and I really welcome this opportunity. Okay, like I said, my name's Heath Smith, and we're going to go through a bit of a presentation here. It's the toughest thing about doing these presentations is knowing exactly what to talk about and what people find interesting. So it's a big mix of just about everything, and we'll try to get through as much as we can. You'll notice I'm labeled as a bounder. You probably might be asking yourself, what is a bounder? But you're gonna have to wait for a few slides till we get to that. But I did start my detection dog career back in 2001, so hitting 20 years, which seems crazy when I didn't even have a dog growing up and didn't expect to work with dogs. But now here I am, and I've helped teach dogs to work on the land, on the water, looking for invasive, endangered, rare, elusive, and invisible targets. And we'll talk about some of those this evening. As Aaron mentioned, I'm a co-founder of Rogue Detection Teams, which we started in 2019. So we're still kind of a fledgling organization, and the co-director and lead instructor for that organization. And then I do want to give a quick shout out. I need to be able to move this thing. There we go. Is to my co-woofer, the dog that's working with me in the field most of the time right now. That would be Pips. He's one of our, I believe 18 is what we have at the moment. He's an Australian cattle dog, also known as a blue heeler. He's a little over 10 years old at this point, and we rescued him back in 2011. And then, as you can see on the slide there, he's trained on all sorts of odors, everything from Fisher and Cougar to different viruses that we might take a look at. Just to give you a little history quickly on Rogue Detection Teams. As I mentioned, we were founded in 2019 by 8 research scientists. And at the time we had 19 rescue dogs. It's built around the idea of collaboration and integrity, and then improving the understanding of this method. So we really want to educate people on how the dogs can be used in a vital way to help protect wildlife. And just quickly there, some of the projects we've worked on just in the past year. And we also moved and bought a new place and set up. So it's been a busy year with everything else that's been going on in the world. So as Rogue Detection Teams, just to give you a quick idea of everything we work on, there's rare and invasive plants, toxins and viruses. A lot of the work we do is with scat, also known as poop. There's carcasses, live animals, and marine wildlife. So those are just a few of the things we've actually trained on, and we'll see a few more of those later. Okay, as I promised, I'll explain what a bounder is. So you might, people think sometimes we're dog trainers, we're dog handlers, we're dog whisperers, we're dog people. None of that really fit for us. And since we went and started our own organization, we decided we'd come up with a new name for ourselves as well. Traditionally, a bounder is probably what you'd think of as a dog handler, but we don't, but kind of based on our philosophy, We don't really think we handle dogs, since they're our co-workers or co-woofers, as we like to say. We're kind of, they're more of a, it's more of a team aspect, hence our name, Rogue Detection Teams. And in that sense, we're bound to these pups. And part of that bonding means that we're looking out for their health and safety. But we're also bound to communicating with them. So opposed to your normal training techniques, all of our training is really focused around the ball, but understanding the communication going on between us and the dogs. And then bounder also kind of fit because in a certain sense, we're bound to the environment or to the earth and helping make sure things are protected and conserved. And just a little tidbit that we actually learned after the fact. So when you look up bounder in the dictionary, it's a man of objectable social behavior. Funny enough, after we came up with this, and just a few months ago, we realized that J.R.R. Tolkien had the term bounder used in Lord of the Rings as someone that protects the outskirts of settlements. So that was kind of an interesting little thing we learned. So jumping into this, I'm going to try to hopefully cover everybody's questions with these different slides, but we'll see. What is a bounder exactly? So when somebody comes to work with us, it can take really about 2 years before they've fully grasped everything that's going to be going on with them and the dog and understanding that communication. It's a rigorous 2-week kind of boot camp, we like to call it. And a lot of people don't make it through that boot camp. It is fairly intense. But the difficulty that people have is really seeing something that's in a certain sense invisible to them in the beginning, seeing that communication that's happening between the dog. And not only that, but they're not so much aware of the communication they're also giving to the dog. We as humans tend to think as communication just being verbally and not so much body language and other things that can be happening. After that 2-week boot camp, they'll have a month-long course where we really kind of take a deep dive into everything. And then that's followed up by another month in the field, which we call a shadow program. It's kind of like an apprenticeship where we go out one-on-one with someone and take turns working with the dog to help them encounter all the different difficulties they might come across in a field season and be there to give them the support they need to know how to deal with that. Overall, the internship or kind of the beginning phase lasts about 6 months. And then people get to go out on their own a bit and really start to kind of push the envelope and think differently, think outside the box. And a unique aspect that I don't know of any other program that does this, but they definitely could. But when someone comes to our program to take a course, if we have 18 dogs, they're most likely going to work with as many of those dogs that we have available at the time. So they could work on their first day, they could work 5 different dogs. The second day they would work a different 5, and the third day a different 5. And this can be really frustrating to new folks because they're like, just let me focus on one dog and just give me a manual so I know what you want me to do. But as they start to do this, it's kind of like a language immersion and they get embroiled in this and they start to kind of almost subconsciously pick up on different cues the dogs are giving off. And what this hopefully teaches them is how to speak dog so that then at the end of this course, they can work all of those 18 dogs and not just one of them. In addition to that, they're going to learn how to read the wind and how the terrain affects those odors. And they're going to get to really have to take a look at all the species they're going to start to work with. It could be fisher, they could be traveling to Africa to work with lions. They could start working on a caterpillar, or then it's an invasive plant. And then from there, they're going to a virus. So the amount of stuff they have to learn and be prepared for is pretty intense. And then you have to think about safety. A lot of times we're in the remote areas, so knowing first aid, how to take care of your dog is really important. I'm going to skip ahead to here. Hopefully you read some of that, but there's a lot to cover. So why dogs? Well, that's a good question. We tried cats and they just weren't really into the ball. I need a little laugh track here, but and then we tried dogs and they were like, okay, let's do this and had a lot of fun. As you can see here, here's 5 different dogs that we have. And actually some of these dogs aren't very sociable, but when you bring out a ball, they forget about what else is around. So they can be really unbiased in what they're doing, because the center of their world is this ball, and that's all they care about. So they're not looking for male or female. If especially in scats, they're just looking for that scat. They're also adaptable. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but the dogs can work on scats and then at the same time be working on plants, and at the same time be looking for nests. So they can do a lot of different things, and they're multifaceted that way. And they are also incredible athletes. We've had a number of vets over the years that are just amazed at the shape these guys are in. And on average, the dogs cover about 20 to 40 kilometers in a day. And they also know how to drive. No, wait, that's not right. No, they have drive. They have this incredible desire to play fetch and just constantly. I'm sure some of y'all have come across these dogs where they just bring you a ball and drop it at your feet, and would do that 24 hours a day if we let them. Here's a nice another photo of Pips, and he's a rogue dog. I'm just going to quickly go through this because there's a lot, but it hopefully gives you an idea of what it's like for one of these dogs. So you can see he's worked with a number of different people. He's trained on tons of different scats, all kinds of carcasses, one live animal, a number of invasive plants, toxins, pellets, eggs. So this is just one dog, and you may read or hear things like dogs can only learn 5 different odors or something. We haven't found a limit, and some of our dogs are trained on over 40 different odors. A lot of the work we do is with scat, and people are always curious, what's so great about picking up poop. I'm not sure it's great, but it provides a lot of information. And the easiest way to think of that is if you were going to the doctor and they did a blood draw, and they're going to get back to you in a week or so and let you know how all your levels are. Well, a scat can do the same thing. So if you're afraid of needles, next time just take a scat and tell the doctor, I said that they could do everything from that. But here's a list of some of the stuff you can get from a scat. You can get the DNA, and this allows you to tell if it's a male or female. It'll give you their individual ID, and then you can start to look and see how many individuals are in that environment and where are they showing up. It also can let you know how stressed that animal is, and if it's a female, if she was pregnant, and if she was successful in that pregnancy. You can also start to look and see in the scat if there's parasites or if the dog has any certain diseases. And of course, since what we eat comes out, you can see what their diet was. And then for some of the work we do, you can also start to see toxins like PCBs and if those are showing up in the animal. So far, I've really made this, and you guys probably have a nice rosy picture of us hiking out with the dogs and enjoying the wilderness. So I do like to really touch on the limitations of this method, and there can be a few, and it can really be a misleading method to folks when they first learn about it. It takes, at least the way we do it, it takes a substantial amount of time and financial investment for us to train, to find first, and then teach and secure bounders and dogs for this work. Really finding the people is like a needle in a haystack. Finding the dogs, while it's a specific type of dog we're looking for, they all come from rescues, and there's an amazing rescue system across the US and around the world now that allows us to quickly find these dogs that are kind of, a lot of the dogs we adopt are, it's kind of their last chance. And they can end up being aggressive or destructive just because they have all this energy, and what they really need is a job, and we're here to give them that job. But adopting a dog that's aggressive or destructive or has this amount of energy isn't the type of dog that just sits on the couch and waits to go to work once a week or something like that. They have to get out daily, and they really need to be thinking about what they're doing and have that active lifestyle. So it takes it takes a lot of work. And there's a lot of dog care associated. I mean, you start thinking about all the stuff for the vets and everything. So it can get to be expensive. And on top of that, though, we could find, generally, we find more scats or samples than people are looking forward to actually having. Because you do have the financial cost of sending all those to a lab and getting DNA from that. And that can add up really quickly, especially if you have, 2,000 samples. Well, that's a hefty bill at the end of everything. One thing that we struggle explaining to folks or kind of educating them about is everything with the dog depends on the wind and where that wind is blowing the odor from the sample. So a sample could be a foot away on the downwind side of you, and the dog has no idea it's there. You can see it clearly, but to the dog that doesn't exist because they don't smell it because the wind's blowing it the other way. On the other hand, a sample could be half a mile away on the upwind side and blowing right down to you, and the dog's going to take you half a mile over whatever's in the way to get to that sample. So there are pluses and minuses with that. And then lastly, the accuracy of a team can really be affected between the connection between the dog and the bounder. And that's really what we tried to cover in our courses. A few quick tips for success, and I'm already behind on my time. You want to avoid spending too much time at one sample, so make things quick and easy to collect. A kind of interesting one is the more species you teach the dog, the more excited they are to go to work. They're kind of like 3 to 4 year old kids, and they want to be out there working. So if you're doing a really rare species and you find maybe 2 every 2 weeks, the dog's not going to be having a lot of fun. Whereas if you layer on enough species and you're finding 20 a day, they're really going to be wanting to go to work. And teaching them additional species does not affect the rare species you're looking for. They'll look for that regardlessly. Lastly, I'll quickly touch on is again that connection or the bond between the bounder and the dog. And a team's really only as strong as the bounder, and they do get overlooked in just about everything. They're really what makes this a success. Okay, the challenge. I just kind of wanted to go through a few slides real quick on what we're trying to do with dog teams. Obviously, I'm sure we're all very aware of the impact that the human population is having on wildlands and places. But what's interesting is there can be multiple pressures that are affecting an area. Here we can see a clear cut, but there may also be a highway nearby, or maybe there's this is in a national park and there's a lot of tourists that come to this area. There's all sorts of things that can be affecting a single species or an ecosystem, and trying to figure out which of those stressors are having a detrimental effect or are the most important can be really difficult. So through the collection of scats, we can start to kind of make an impact web and look to see how each one of those is affecting the community. And so the solution, obviously, I'm going to say it's the dog teams, but there's a lot of different things. We like to say we're just one tool in the toolbox. And we don't want to limit research to just the dogs. It's a type of method that goes really well with radio telemetry or hair snares or cameras. But using the dogs, you can get really quickly, you can start to get a population estimation of multiple species in the area. And then you can start to develop models and look at female reproductive success and survival because you have individual IDs and how the species is doing. I'm going to go through these just a little quicker, but our philosophy, which is actually very important. As I mentioned, we rescue dogs. Each of these dogs has a phenomenal drive to play fetch. And so that doesn't mean they're just interested in playing ball. We need those dogs that want to bring the ball back and have you throw it over and over. And this allows us to start very quickly with a simple communication that connects us with the dogs. And so a lot of people ask, how long does it take you to teach a dog to do this kind of work? And some of our dogs we've taken to work as soon as they've shown up, like directly out of the car. On average, I would say, teaching the dogs for certain things like sit or working on recall, it can take about a week. But comparing that with the bounder, which takes about 2 years, you can really start to get how important it is to invest in a well-taught team. And then, as we mentioned, the dogs can do a lot of different odors and well more than probably 40. That philosophy is built all around communication. And we really strive to approach that communication from the dog's point of view. So we're not trying to teach the dog to speak English or to do exactly, kind of turn them into a robot. We work with them on an individual basis. So when someone comes to our program, they have to learn 18 different dogs and how each of those dogs is different. And through that, we let the dog set the pace, and then we guide the dog so they hopefully can understand the dog. And that means taking things in a very simple step. And I could spend probably 30 minutes talking about this slide. But we also are very careful to listen to the dog's feedback and be very cognizant of when they're having a difficulty or they're confused about what we said. Okay, so here's I wanted to highlight a few projects we've been doing in Oregon. This is a very interesting one where we're looking for silver spot caterpillars, and the silver spot is a threatened species along the coast in Oregon. If some of y'all are familiar with Mount Hebo, that's one area. And this work's being done with the Pacific University, the Woodland Park Zoo, and the U.S. Forest Service. So here's a picture of the butterfly. We're not actually looking for the butterflies, but we're looking for the caterpillars that before it becomes a butterfly. And if you can see in this photo here, what we taught the dogs, we were working with scat again, and for caterpillars, that scat is called frass, and I'll zoom in just a little bit. This frass is roughly about the size of a poppy seed. And when we were first teaching the dogs this, we sprinkled a little out to just see if they would notice it. And they went over and they smelled it, but when they smell, they breathe back out again. And of course, we lost all of that frass very quickly because it went everywhere. So we ended up taking a piece of tape and sticking on the tape, and that worked fantastically. Interestingly, the caterpillars like to feed on one particular plant, violets here. So as you can see with the background behind that violet, finding little poppy seeds of frass is pretty much impossible. But when the caterpillars start to feed on these violets, we can see the chew marks. So the dog will cue us in that the frass is in the area, and then we take a closer look and we can see where they've chewed on the violets. Now this last slide is, I fudged a little bit here. This is actually Taylor's checker spot, which is another caterpillar we're working on in Washington. But I didn't have a photo of the silver spot on a violet because there's only been one that's been actually found in the wild on a violet. And so very rare. You'd have to be lucky to have a photo like that. So here's a little test. We did have the Woodland Park Zoo provide us some caterpillars they had been raising, and you can see them feeding here. This is just a little thing. Do you see anything? Look closer. And that's me taking a closer look because you need a magnifying glass. And then you'll see this little bitty caterpillar here. These guys are super tiny, and when you're walking around a field trying to find one of those in brushy stuff, it's very difficult. And here's on the right there, that's one of my dogs, Allie, and she kind of paved the way for the caterpillar work we've been doing. She's retired right now, but so Allie hit a spot there, and then we all move in to see, okay, what's there. This is just a quick video of Pips, and this is what we call the wall, and it's one of the things we use to teach the dogs. So you'll quickly get to see him move through here. So you saw Pips hit it, and then the bounder said, "Show me," and you notice he doesn't go right back to it. So he's looking for that odor each time, and each of these little holes, they're so small that for odor to come out, the dog actually has to breathe into the hole to push the air back out, and that's how they find that sample. But this works great for things like the caterpillar. Okay, Another project we're doing that's super cool and also super tough is the Pacific marten. It's sometimes we're doing a subspecies here, sometimes referred to as the coastal marten or the Humboldt marten. And it's found along the coast of California and Oregon in in like some of the densest stuff you can imagine. A lot of times you're crawling to keep up with the dog. It's estimated to be somewhere around 300 individuals, and it can be in stuff from old growth to that really dense shrub area that I was speaking about. And if anybody's familiar with the Oregon dunes, then the next time you're out there, take a look at some of the thickest stuff you can imagine, and that's what we're trying to get through. These guys are super cute, but they are a voracious carnivore. They were thought to be extinct until 1995, so just kind of somewhat recently rediscovered. And right now, they're, like most things, are suffering from loss of habitat, fragmented habitat, wildfires, and highway, I think it's 101 or Highway 1, goes right up through their where they live. So a lot of roadkills. So enter the rogue dogs. How could we help? Well, we started working with researchers from Nakazi and the Pacific Northwest Research Station to determine where these martens were in their habitat. So along with camera traps they've been putting out, we're also using the dogs. And this allows us to survey areas where we know those martens are present, like the Oregon dunes, but also to expand into other areas and see just exactly how far and where these martens are showing up. One of the things about this project is it almost kind of makes or breaks some of our teams because it is so challenging to be in. This photo doesn't actually do it justice, but you can actually see somebody in it, so we use that. But it's rough, it's steep, it's thick, and sometimes you get stuck in the middle of these patches of salmonberry or blackberry, and you just don't know what to do. Since it's such a large area that we're working in, most of the time we're camping out of our cars. So bounders and dogs will be out there for months at a time, traveling from one spot to another. It's also, since it's the Pacific Northwest, it's raining most of the time. So add that into there as well. And we're looking for these scats. That's about the size of your pinky, and it's going to be in some of the thickest stuff possible. So hopefully that gives you an idea how hard it is to find that and how exciting it is when you do find it. Here's Scooby at some marten scats that he's found, which are kind of hard to see, but they're in front of the pine cones there. And you can see that Scooby can't even stand up, so crazy. And then you end up getting torn to pieces trying to hack your way through everything. But it's all in the name of collecting data, and there we are, putting a scat into a vial. So the great thing about doing this work and the reason we go through all that trouble is when we do find those scats, it's like finding gold to a certain extent. Each of them will be analyzed for species and diet and start to give us a larger picture of that population and how they're doing. It gives researchers that we're working with the baseline data to help determine how to help that population that's at risk and help conserve them. And then sometimes our dogs are rescue dogs to super dogs, are what they're called. And without their help and their noses, we'd never be able to do this. Okay, I'm not doing too bad on time. So to learn more about rogues, there's a number of podcasts, and I realize the slides, hopefully people can go back and look at it later, but there's some great podcasts that we've been really lucky to be part of, and you can take a listen there, and then all the different social media stuff on the right there. And again, even though Aaron said it, we do want to thank Roughwear. As you've probably seen in all our photos, they have been a huge supporter. And I just want to say thanks to everyone, and there will be a time for questions following Rob's presentation. And yeah, thanks very much. I don't know what to do now though.
I'll see if I can share my screen. Yeah, thanks. That was fantastic. So bear with me for just a moment.
Did Rob freeze?
Yeah, give me just a, can you hear me hopefully?
Yes, we can still hear you.
Yeah, I have hope that we're making progress here. Thanks everybody for your patience. Are you able to see that?
Yes.
Fantastic, great. And just shout if suddenly you're not able to anymore. Yeah, thanks Heath, that was really interesting. So yeah, my name is Rob Clavins. I'm the Northeast Oregon Field Coordinator for Oregon Wild. I'm based in Wallowa County, just outside the town of Enterprise, and about 3 miles from the boundary of the Eagle Cap Wilderness. In addition to my work for Oregon Wild, my wife and I we own and operate a working farm and bed and breakfast, which I will shamelessly plug as being dog friendly. We've got a cattle dog of our own that we've tried to train to find wolf scat, and we've not done it as rigorously, so she's probably not ready to join the rogue team yet, but she's actually pretty darn good at it. So I spend most of my time doing forest work, and well, being in nature generally has always been where I find my grounding. That's brought me to where I am. It's a love of wildlife that's really kind of brought me to where I am today, and motivates a lot of my work on the personal level. And I should mention, I do also love dogs. So this presentation was just really exciting for me, and I'm just glad to have had an opportunity to listen in. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to talk about some of the related work that we do before trying to leave as much time as possible for questions. And I did want to make sure to give a shout out to Chandra Legui for reaching out to the Rogue team and setting this up and making it possible tonight. I also, Heath, really appreciated hearing about your work with coastal marten and butterflies. Our work on charismatic megafauna like wolves and sea otters is what gets most of the attention. But we also work hard to keep common species common and try to spend the most time on wildlife that have disproportionate impacts on their landscape or need the most help. And so when it comes to the coastal marten, our staff based in Eugene have been working for years to help restore the dunes ecosystem, which means balancing the needs of both open sand-reliant species with those like the marten that also require dense cover. We've also worked to protect some of those large core habitats like Devil's Staircase and other places in the Siuslaw National Forest that provide habitat not just for marten, but murrelets, spotted owls, and all sorts of other cool things. And then my colleague Danielle has also been busy in Salem working with our allies to help successfully usher in a ban on trapping for coastal marten. And though we were denied state endangered protections for the species, we're working to get Governor Brown to reform ODFW so it's no longer hostile to its own conservation mission. So I'm really excited to say that I'm going to get a chance to work with the Rogue team this year. I've been plotting with a few folks for a few years to do this kind of work and was sitting in this spot when, much to my dismay, my phone rang. It was Nick Cady, an attorney for Cascadia Wildlands and also on the steering committee of the Pacific Wolf Coalition. And he called to say that they'd secured funding for this type of work and asked if I knew a place. Despite my disappointment that there was cell service here, I was just absolutely ecstatic. Not far from here at all, the Forest Service has proposed a massive timber sale called Morgan Nesbitt, which is named for 2 buttes in the area. Even if you don't know it by that name, the Morgan Nesbitt project landscape is probably a place that Oregon wildlife lovers are familiar with. It was the heart of the range of the Imnaha Pack and where wolves initially returned to Oregon. The project area is 87,000 acres. It goes right up to the boundary of the Eagle Cap Wilderness, which you can see is this green line here, and right down into the Hells Canyon National Recreation Area, which is this green blob down here. And it also covers a whole bunch of wild, unroaded landscapes. And it's important to note that, like where I live, this landscape is the homeland of the Nimipu, who are better known as the Nez Perce tribe, that have lived here since time immemorial, and there's evidence of that for at least 16,000 years. I believe the Cayuse, Umatilla also spent time here. The Shoshone Bannock and Paiute tribes also made forays up into this part of the country. And notably, the Nimipu never willingly or legally gave up their claim to these places. So this landscape is home to wolves, elk, and endangered salmon. In the meadow that this wolf is walking towards, there's a plant that's so rare was only recently described by science. There may be moose and lynx in the area. Oregon's only wolverine has been spotted nearby. There have also been credible sightings of fisher. And I'm willing to bet that if grizzlies are ever allowed to have a chance to return to Oregon on their own, it'll be somewhere near here. It's only miles from a recent grizzly sightings in Idaho. And then whether you like, owls or raptors or neotropical migrants, it's also just a great place for birding. And then the rivers are some of Oregon's most truly wild and scenic. Despite the fact that parts of it are being overrun by cows, it's one of my favorite places to explore. The landscape is incredibly diverse with everything from cactuses to alpine environments, either in the project area or just within a stone's throw of it. And it's not just fun to explore. Amid climate change and increasing development, it's clear that this landscape is a connectivity corridor of continental importance. The Morgan Nesbitt project area is basically at the heart of this corridor that you can see here. It's basically right in this area. And then the inset on the bottom right is another example of analysis of a specific species and their habitat in Oregon, in this case, wolverine. You can see that if this link here were to be cut off, the rest of Oregon and beyond would likely be cut off from the rest of the population in the continental United States. And then one other thing that's kind of interesting about this place is, surprisingly to a lot of people, it's actually more closely associated with the Rocky Mountain ecosystem than with the Cascades. And it's the furthest south connection point between these two different ecosystems. And it's even special enough that at one point there was serious consideration given to designating it as part of a national park. That's a whole nother story. My goal here is just to point out that this is just a tremendously special place. But it's also full of big trees and it's generally unprotected, which means it's being eyed by the timber industry and agency staff that are eager to fill their timber quotas. And there's a lot of good stuff that could be done on this landscape. Some of it could even send logs to the mill. Thanks to previous logging, there are old clear-cut plantations with trees that don't belong there. Thanks to decades of fire suppression, some of the meadows have disappeared and the aspen are in trouble. For those reasons, and then others like continued mismanagement, like overgrazing and beaver trapping, there's some really legitimate restoration needs in some parts of this landscape. So, I would suggest we could fix fish passage barriers. We could repair and close and restore roads that are damaging streams. We could put both natural and prescribed fire back to work for us. We could also fix the long ignored trail system. We could enhance recreation that supports local economies and provide solitude, freedom, and a sense of place that you just can't get anywhere else. And then there's also just tremendous values to restore native species and tribal activities. And all of those things can create jobs. By thinning small trees in the right places, we can make improvements for wildlife, allow natural processes like fire to retake their place on the landscape. Unfortunately, though, if the recent past is any predictor of the future, and these photos are from a timber sale that already overlaps this project proposal area that's ongoing, those good things are only going to be a small part of the project proposal. Unfortunately, restoration has really become a euphemism for aggressive old school logging, and success is measured by board feet sent to the mill, acres logged, and how fast the agency can rush through or skip public process entirely. And unfortunately, with the Trump administration recently removing protections for old growth in Eastern Oregon, what's been pitched as a restoration project has the potential to be extremely controversial. Already, we've been told that they plan to log big and old fire-resistant trees miles from the nearest paved roads. The proposal goes right up to the edge of the Eagle Cap Wilderness, along rivers with endangered fish and proposed wilderness and wild scenic river corridors. And most egregiously, I think it's 60 square miles of the project area are in the Hells Canyon National Recreation Area, which Congress set aside for quiet recreation, not for sending logs to the mill. But we also do have to give the Forest Service credit. There are lots of incentives to simply get the cutout, but there's also a lot of really great people at the agency, and most of them want to do the right thing. There was recently a change in leadership on this part of the forest, so we're hoping for a fresh start. That could be really significant in getting a good outcome for wild and human communities alike. Already, we're working with wildlife biologists from several agencies to identify the parts of the landscape that may be the most important for wildlife and identify which species could be most affected by any management activities. And we're all coordinating, or will be soon, with the Rogue team. And in addition to looking for wolves, which will almost certainly be there, we hope to look for some combination of marten, lynx, wolverine, and fisher. All of them are important for really different reasons. And I know one of the main reasons we find ourselves in conflict with the agency, and sometimes the agency finds itself in conflict with itself, is that in addition to political pressure to get the cutout and just institutional inertia, there's simply a huge lack of data. And the reality is that the agency has been so starved of resources that they're just woefully understaffed and don't have the resources to do this sort of work. So we hope that we'll get good information on wildlife presence in parts of the project area, and that'll help the Forest Service create a project that meets its legitimate restoration goals, avoids conflict, and doesn't harm wildlife habitat. So just to wrap up, most of our direct work on wildlife is in the halls of the Capitol. It's in front of the ODFW Commission, and far too often these days it's in our offices and behind computers. But we do try to put boots on the ground whenever we can through things like our Citizen Wildlife Monitoring Program, where most of the wildlife photos in my presentation came from, ground truthing timber sales and public lands grazing, and all sorts of other field work. But protecting and restoring native wildlife has always been a major driver of even the wonkiest stuff that we never put in our newsletters. Our staff collectively spend thousands of hours working on dozens of timber sales across the state every year, like Morgan Nesbitt. We monitor existing projects that are ongoing. We write comments, all while fighting to protect the last best places in the state. And again, when wildlife, even when wildlife aren't out front and center, it's always been a major part of our mission. So I'll leave it there and just say I'm really excited to work with Heath and the Rogue Detection team and encourage you to follow them, support us, and of course, love your dogs. That's all I got.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Heath. Those were two incredible presentations, and we've got some really, really good questions here that I'm going to try to work through. Let's see. Is there a point, this is for Heath. I mean, most of these are going to be for Heath. Not that we don't love you too, Rob, but is there a point in the training where the bounder get their own dog? Do the dog, like, how is the like living situation? Where do the dogs stay vis-a-vis the bounders?
Oh, that's a great question. It differs. It depends on a lot of things. So as a bounder, you could work 5 different dogs in a year. And while we all kind of have, I don't want to say our favorites, but we have certain dogs we work with more. As that dog gets older and approaches retirement, it will retire with one of the bounders. And generally we all know who that dog's going to retire with. But up until that point, and sometimes even after that, these dogs will still go out with other bounders on projects. And then they live with us. Whenever we're on a study, they stay in the rooms with us. Honestly, I don't think we're ever separate from our dogs. So,
have you found that there are certain breeds that are better suited to this type of work?
Yeah, so that's another great question, and I need to put a slide in that shows all of our dogs to really give you an idea. We have a couple dogs that are really small, maybe less than 20 pounds. Like one's probably a Chihuahua mix of some sort. So there are certain breeds that do better, and what that really comes down to is what kind of job we're doing. So and not to pick on pit bulls or anything, but that's a breed that's, people are often asking about, do we have pit bulls? And we have had pit bulls, but they have such thin skin. When they get into this really thick stuff that we work in, it destroys their skin, their fur, their ears. And we're doing a lot of first aid. And so also another problem with a dog like that, or maybe like a Rottweiler, these really muscular dogs, when you're trying to cover 40 kilometers over boulders and logs and everything, they're not really built for that. So you do have to think about, what's this dog able to do? And then lastly, we really shy away from giant dogs. They have to fit in our car. We have to be able to pack enough food for them. Sometimes they're flying. They have to be able to fit on planes. So we do look for dogs that are generally right around 60 pounds or less. But otherwise, they're all from the rescue. And if you go on our website, you can see all kinds of cute photos of them.
You talked about the focus of the fetch ball, and the ball retrieval. 2 questions about that maybe we can smash together. Is there a difference between having a ball and doing fetch, or a stick? Is it just there's an item, or is it specifically a ball? And then how do you get from this is a ball and we want you to retrieve it to this is some poop and we want you to find it?
Yeah, okay, great. If this is a dog that's really going to work well from us, it could be a pine cone, a stick, a rock. It could be a pumpkin. Like we've had dogs that are fascinated with pumpkins because it looks like a ball. So anything they can pick up and basically throw at you to get you to throw it for them is what they're looking for. We do, we focus a lot, or we use the rough wear turnip a lot because folks may not know this, but normal tennis balls are actually, they're not good for dogs. It wears their teeth down. And when you have a dog that's just crazy about balls, they can also eat tennis balls very easily. So the rough wear turnip's an amazing toy for us. To answer your other question, it's not as hard as you think. Since these guys are so driven to find the ball, you set out a scat of something we used to use Wolverine as our main training scat. It smells bad. The dogs want to go over it and they're just curious about it like normal dogs. But as soon as they put their nose to it, we just drop that ball in front of them and then they forget about the scat and they're playing ball. But then all of a sudden you take the ball away and you wait a minute and they'll go back over and they'll smell that again. You drop the ball again. And then you move that scat to somewhere else and you take the ball away and they're looking and they're starting to make that connection. And then boom, they're looking for Wolverine the rest of their life.
A few people have been asked about donating to your program. I assume they can do that on your website, but I'll go ahead and give you an opportunity to plug that, or can they?
I'm sure they can. I actually don't know the answer to that one, but I'm sure it's on our website somewhere. And if not, they can send us an email from our website and I'll put them in touch with the right person.
Great. A few people have asked about how they get started doing the kind of work, becoming a bounder, like either through your program or if there are other similar programs across the country, or I know we have some people internationally that were very interested in this program. So, how do people who are interested in this get started?
That's a good question too. There are tons of amazing programs around the world now doing this, and the interesting thing about them is we're all a bit different. None of us are really the same if you take a close look. So it's a tough question to answer because we do things a little different than everybody else. For us, what we really kind of look for when we're looking at bounders is familiarity, for the most part, with the outdoors. So folks that are comfortable hiking by themselves off trail for months at a time, living out of their car. That's a pretty rare person, honestly. And for all the dog portion of it, we really teach them that, and it's just having an open mind when you come to take a course, and really having that sense of kind of introspection and being able to think about what you're doing and how it has an effect on other things.
Some questions for you, Rob, that I'm going to smash together. Oh, he's shocked. It was a great presentation. How can the public be involved in the Morgan Nesbitt project? You've got some people out gathering the science and doing that kind of thing, but in terms of is there a decision point for the public to do something right now, or do we need to wait until some other kind of comment period? And where are we at in that process?
Yeah, wow. I am surprised. I would not have asked me a question. I would have asked, because I have questions for Heath too, but I will try to be as quick as I can. Yeah, the project is in its very early stages, which is why we're kind of saying, there's a lot of good work that could be done, and there's also a lot of places that it could go in the wrong direction. And as I say, given recent history, we're pretty nervous about that. So we understand the Forest Service is going to use a novel approach to public comment, which is kind of complicated, and we're not exactly sure how that's going to work out. That said, people can certainly weigh in and let the Forest Service know at this time what they are concerned about and what they want to see happen in a landscape like this. In particular, we've been saying, the Hells Canyon National Recreation Area is not a place for industrial logging. It's a place to prioritize recreation. That's what Congress designated it for. So that's sort of right off the bat, the easy thing we should be asking the Forest Service to do. And then once we find out more about the specifics of the project, I think there will be better opportunities to weigh in. And I think Oregon Wild, we will, if you're on our action alert list, I'm sure we'll let you know when there are opportunities to weigh in, because we're talking about a huge project area in a really important place. So to a certain extent, I have to tell folks kind of to stand by. However, one thing that people can do that is really, really important right now is, I think 2 business days before the Trump administration left office, a Trump appointee signed a decision to eliminate protections for old growth forests on over 9 million acres of public lands in Eastern Oregon. Only in the cluster cuss of what is going on right now would something like that possibly fly under the radar. A lot of people aren't even aware it has happened. So we are working really hard to encourage Senators Wyden and Merkley to work with the Biden administration to undo that rule change. They've stood up to the Trump administration before. They've stood up for old growth protections before, and we expect and hope that they'll do so again, especially since President Biden has put forward an executive order saying decisions like this need to at least be reviewed, and through a lens of climate. I won't go down the climate rabbit hole. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and just put a link to that action alert in the text or in the chat box, as well as some links for people who want to know more. If we see this rule pass, it's not just going to be the Morgan Nesbitt project area. It's going to be all across 9 million acres of Eastern Oregon forest, and that has the potential to be devastating for so many reasons.
Rob, this was your question, and it's come up from some other people too. Tell us about the water and the marine environments and tracking with the dogs. Like, how does that work? Are they actually going into the water, or is this all beach work?
Well, it could be all three actually. So Allie, the dog that was doing the caterpillar work there, she also worked on Oregon spotted frog. And we were actually up in BC doing this one, but they had transmitters on the frogs, and we taught Allie using some frogs from the zoo. And at first she had no idea they're there, but once she learned those frogs, we went out to the wild where they had these frogs with transmitters, and Allie was able to point, she'd like wade out into the water and point that there's a frog down here. And so we had the telemetry and could see that, yes, there was a frog there. And then after we got out of the water, it's this real thick thatch, and she just stopped all of a sudden at the spot. And so we pulled the thatch away, and there was a frog down in there. So there's things like that where they can detect stuff underwater. And you know, people have done this with dogs for a long time, like cadaver dogs and stuff. So it's really not that, we're not breaking ground here, but it's still amazing. And then dogs are being used on boats, you know, to do a lot of stations and out on the water and picking up where scats are and things like that. And then also from the beach, you know, there's a lot of stuff you could do. And sea turtles. We've done work with sea turtles looking for their nests, but we're also doing hopefully in the future, doing some work with finding sea turtles that are out in the ocean. So I mean, the possibilities are endless for what you can do, honestly. I had a quick question though.
Oh, sure.
Maybe I could ask later, but I see there's a lot of questions and I can type an answer. Am I able to do that after we're done?
I'll be able to export those questions and send them over to you. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay.
And then maybe we'll have, when this is being recorded, we'll send out an email that has a link to that tomorrow. We'll add some other links. So we'll have the action that Rob just put in the chat. We can have some references to the other podcast interviews that you've done, and then any other questions that you know, maybe too like narrow for the larger thing. You can type those out, and we can include those in the blog posting as well. We'll send out that link so everybody will have all those resources available.
Great. Fantastic.
Do you have a dog with you right now, and can you bring it on camera?
I actually had to put them in the other room so they wouldn't wouldn't distract me. But generally, yes, they're sitting right here with me. In fact, I've got some dog beds I could show you, but no dogs at the moment.
Are the bounders that you work with, are these volunteers or are these staff?
They are staff, and we work very hard. Actually, one of the dogs just came out, so maybe I'll show you in a second. But they are staff, and we work very hard to make sure that we're able to keep them employed year round. So they do. It's a tough job. It's a hard job. Yeah, but they're not volunteers.
Do you ever use the teams for agricultural work? Looking at things like water contamination or escaped GMOs. That's
Oh, that's a good question. We haven't done water contamination. We were doing some PCB work that was kind of similar to that, and dogs have been used for water contamination, so that's definitely something can be done. Two interesting projects we're doing right now is we're looking at a virus and a bacteria that's affecting cherry orchards, and then one that's affecting grape vineyards, and looking to see if we can have an early detection of those to help remove them from the orchards and vineyards.
I've been having to kind of multitask, both asking the questions and then trying to find the next one. So did you talk about international teams or teams outside the organizations that are kind of doing similar work outside of the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah, there's teams all over the world, and we're working with helping get a number of programs started up in Spain and Trinidad, Fiji. We have kind of partially on our staff, we have a bounder in Portugal that does a lot of work overseas for us, especially now during the COVID times when we can't really travel. So yeah, it's everywhere. We're everywhere.
And how do you cue the dogs to look for a particular species of scat when it knows how to find the scat of lots and lots of species? Or are they always looking for all of the scents that they know?
Yeah, that's great. A great question. They actually will look for all the scents they know. And I saw someone here, a great question regarding search and rescue dogs, and I'll answer that one later. But yeah, they look for all the scats they know, and what you generally, most everything we're working on there's not a lot of them, like wolverines. If we ever found a wolverine, it'd be fantastic, or a wolverine scat. So the dogs, once you teach them, they're going to look for that, and it's easy. I mean, a reward takes maybe a minute. So even if we train them on something prolific like coyote, all that does is allow them to get more rewards, and that really drives them to want to stay. Like, there's times we have to put them on a leash to get them to go home. But when you have very few rewards, they start to get distracted by other things, and you really want to keep them amped up for what they're wanting to do out there. And what you can do is, you can put out samples and reward them, but they kind of learn that game, and it's not as fun as if they're finding, things that are out there naturally. I hope I answered that.
Yeah, go ahead and do the search and rescue question. I just didn't know what the acronym was, so I was moving past that question.
It would be a long. I mean, I want to take some time to answer that one, but it's even kind of a long question, so I'd have to read it. So I don't want to pause too long to do that.
Okay.
But I will definitely.
I was vamping for time so I can find the next question.
I can do that then. So they asked, with a search and rescue, I've been encouraged to have only one singular odor to focus on in my dog's search work. The experienced handlers admit that by doing live search, teaching various and other odors, that their dogs are at a disadvantage. I wonder about this, especially considering you're encouraging as many as possible. So that's a really great question, and it depends what you're doing. So you'll see dogs that have multiple jobs. And if we were teaching a dog to do like anti-poaching and searching out like a live animal, but at the same time doing scat, well, then at a certain point, the dog's it's got to decide between, okay, which one am I doing? Am I going to look after, am I chasing down these poachers, or am I showing you there's a cheetah scat right here? And so that's probably not a type of situation you want to teach your dog two things. You want to focus on poachers. For us, scats and even the live animals we're doing, those are generally like salamanders or frogs or something that aren't moving very far. And the dogs aren't tracking those. They're actually taking us to where they are. So all of our odors are stationary. So if let's say there was a cheetah scat and a hyena scat, and we've taught the dog both, and it's right between the two, it has to pick one of those, and it will. As soon as it finds that one, it gets rewarded, and immediately, like a bullet, shoots over to the other one and says, I got this one too. So, and we see that all the time. So they're not going to pass up anything, because each one of those is a chance to play fetch.
What kind of like science background do the bounders have? So are they like a botany background, biology background, to kind of inform the work that they're doing out in the field?
That's another great question. Some of our staff we have an English major that got involved with conservation through Student Conservation Association, but didn't take any, anything besides general biology or whatever. Was focused on English and writing for college. So it's nothing that technical. We kind of show folks how to learn everything they need to know when we get out there. And that includes learning about the species in the ecosystem. So you don't have to have a wildlife background. It does, I think generally most of us do, because that's why we're attracted to this work. But yeah, it's not required. I did want to point out quickly that we have a biologist that's watching, Chris Loggers, that actually pointed out my photograph of the butterfly was actually a checker spot and not a silver spot. So apologies on that, but we do work with both. So I owe him after the presentation.
Well, since you've been scanning through some of these questions, is there anyone that you saw stand out as kind of a final wrap-up question?
Oh, I was having trouble because I wanted to pay attention to what Rob was saying at the same time. And there got to be so many. When I scroll through, it just starts going really fast.
Yeah, I guess one last one for Rob, and I don't think you're the specific Oregon Wild staffer to answer it, Rob, but we did have a few questions on wildlife corridors and state policy. And I know Danielle's our wildlife person, so she would have a better answer for that, but I'm wondering how familiar you are, Rob, in any work being done at the state level.
Yeah, there is some I don't know as well on the state level. My work has largely begun much more focused on project level and Northeastern Oregon specific. With the leadership of the LeGrand Ranger District, I think really leading the way in the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest, they've been doing some great work in specific projects where they will start to look at in a project area, where are those cores and connectivity corridors, and then go out and ground like models, where are they, then they go out and they ground truth them. Is this really good habitat for martin or flammulated owls or whatever those species are, and actually try to build into the project design areas to connect those different core habitats for lots of different species. But the big problem is, again, that they just don't actually really have the resources to be able to go out and ground truth that stuff and really know if what the models show is there in a timely fashion, or if those species are really there. So on the federal level, I think there are some efforts beginning in some cases really from the ground, working their way up. And then at the state level, the reality too is that, and that's part of Danielle's work, is that the state agency has really been driven by hunting and fishing and harvestable game species, game species, rather than the 88% or so of species that are non-game. So to the extent I've seen it, even where they're doing that, they're largely focusing on common species like elk and deer, which is great, nothing wrong with that. But the species that are really in trouble are really suffering from a lack of resources. And so there are some efforts. There's been some good things with highway underpasses in Central Oregon. They've been doing that up in Washington with big overpasses. There's some opportunities to do those things here as well. So maybe you just detected that I'm kind of all over the place, because I know a little bit, but not enough to really answer it. I think the really short answer would be probably that, yeah, there are some efforts. There's certainly a major recognition that it is a serious concern in an age of climate change and rapid development, especially in rural areas. So the recognition is there. I think we're being far too slow at the state and federal level of actually doing positive things to address the problem. But it is starting to at least be recognized. And I might just suggest that maybe if we have these questions, maybe we can try to answer that offline later with some more specifics.
Great. Well, we are now 7 minutes over. So I want to thank Heath for joining us. That was an incredible presentation. Rob and I were lamenting that we were both muted, and I'm sure many others, because we were laughing at your wonderful jokes. Some people commented in the chat and in the questions about the great dog humor. So thank you for giving us your time for this evening. Really, really appreciated it. Really appreciate everybody who tuned in and who will get the video tomorrow, and we'll have a bunch more resources in that link. So
Thank you.
that's our presentation.
Thank you. I much appreciated. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.